Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
All right, I'm sitting here with Dr. Mike Brazier. And recently, he was down in Louisiana, along the Gulf Coast, working on some restoration stuff that DU's working on down there. Mike, can you kind of explain what you're doing? They're called Marsh terraces.
Yes, Marsh terracing. It's a restoration technique, one of the many restoration techniques that DU's involved in on coastal Louisiana. There's a lot of any waterfowl hunter that has a good view of sort of the landscape of waterfowl habitats across North America will know that Louisiana has a vast amount of coastal wetlands that provide important habitat for waterfowl. But what folks also probably know is that Louisiana is losing coastal wetlands probably at a faster rate than any other location in North America. Since 1932, I think it's like 1.2 million acres of vegetated marsh have been converted to open water due to a number of factors. We're not going to get into all of those factors on this podcast. We'll have an opportunity.
What's the rate? It's like a football field every... There's a number in there. I can never remember what it is.
I think the last time it was calculated, it was like 1.5 football fields every 45 minutes or something of that nature. Yeah. It gets recalculated every
drastic.
now and then. Well, and the thing you have to remember about that is that reflects a long-term average, right? Yeah. And so as the long-term rate of wetland loss changes, so does that little thumbnail sketch of the rate at which loss occurs. And that's a little that's something that's designed to emphasize the significance of what's actually happening there. So that's you can convert that 1.2 million acres to something that's more time relevant, I guess.
And this terracing is one piece of the puzzle to what Ducks Unlimited's work is as far as restoration. Not only what these terraces are, I want you to explain, but who else is even doing this?
Well, so the restoration technique itself has been in existence since 1990. So in the natural resource management world, it's still fairly new. I think the first restoration, the first terracing project was implemented in southwestern Louisiana on Sabine National Wildlife Refuge. Various conservation agencies, organizations have been associated with the implementation of this technique, and I'll explain what it is here in a minute. But folks like Ducks Unlimited, NOAA, National Oceanic, through their National Marine Fisheries Service, NRCS, actually the way things work in Louisiana, I think they've probably been involved in some terracing projects, and then the state agencies, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and then actually in Texas as well. This is a technique that's used there as well. So by now people are probably wondering, well, what the heck is marsh terracing anyway? And so the first thing that I'll try to help people understand is you look across this coastal marsh landscape of Louisiana and Texas, and so you have this interspersion of vegetation and water. And the way this marsh loss process works, at least one way that it works, is you get these areas of vegetated marsh that begin to erode due to a number of factors. And as those areas erode and convert to open water, you start to get these open bodies of water. And the bigger those things become, the greater the wave energy that gets created.
So then the worse erosion.
That's right. And so it's this negative feedback cycle. As that vegetation dies, erodes, or whatever, it converts to open water, and then you're just accelerating the erosion of the adjacent areas. And that also has a lot of other unintended negative, I shouldn't say unintended, but has a lot of other negative consequences by increasing turbidity. And when you increase turbidity, you reduce the opportunity for light to penetrate into the water column and grow submerged aquatics, which are good groceries for ducks. So...
and other wildlife and fish and everything. I mean,
that's right. And
we're all ducks.
That's right. I don't know who came up with the idea, but it's a principle that's been applied in other areas as well. And so what you want to do is sort of interrupt that negative feedback cycle of open water getting bigger and more turbid and more wavy. You want to interrupt that cycle. And so what people have done is they take these, terracing is a process by which you go into these open water areas that were formerly marsh, and you excavate from the substrate there with these.
So you're digging it out right there.
Yeah, in these, what are they called, marsh buggies, where it's basically an excavator and the tracks are mounted on like a floating buoy or floating platform.
So it's like a big barge.
So it's a barge on tracks.
Oh, barge on tracks.
It's literally like an excavator that floats. The tracks are on some buoy.
Scariest tank imaginable.
It's pretty crazy because you see these things out in the water, and if the water's deep enough, you'll see them rocking back and forth, literally almost floating. And so these excavators go out there, and so they excavate the bottom of this the substrate, and they'll pile it up into these linear shapes, linear ridges. In some cases, they make a checkerboard pattern out of these ridges. In some cases, they make a series of chevrons. Mm-hmm. And so they create this series of ridges in this open water body, and that is designed to interrupt that negative feedback cycle. And it occurs through sort of a stepwise process. When you create these earthen berms, if you will, they're up above the surface of the water. Then you reduce the length over which the waves can generate height and energy and all that kind of stuff. So you're reducing wave energy, and by reducing wave energy, you reduce erosion of the surrounding marsh. You also reduce turbidity in theory, and then that allows the submerged aquatics a greater opportunity to grow. And so then when you improve the submerged aquatics, the idea is that we're improving habitat conditions for fish and water birds and waterfowl. So
it's like a big levee that it's like various shapes, chevrons.
It's a
like
series.
If you're looking at it from an aerial photograph.
It's a series of levees within an open water body. Yep. And if anyone
that aren't connected.
That's right. They're not connected.
Yeah.
They're just sort of segmented. If you ever fly out of Lafayette, fly out of New Orleans, across coastal Louisiana, you can look down. Actually, you can go on Google Earth and do this as well. Just sort of pan around Google Earth, and you will see these sort of linear-shaped features, systematically linear features in certain parts of the coast. There's a lot in southwestern Louisiana. There's some south of Houma, south of Lafitte. And so it wouldn't be too hard to go out there and to go on Google Earth and find those.
Be the first to know when ducks are on the move. Sign up for DU's waterfowl migration email alerts and receive ongoing in-depth updates on the latest habitat conditions, weather changes, and hunting reports for your flyway. Visit ducks.org/migration alerts.
When you're digging these up and building these berms, are you replanting vegetation, or does the vegetation naturally grow?
Well, it's both. But typically, when after the terrace is constructed, usually these projects come with a vegetation establishment component where, yes, you do plant at least the perimeter of the terrace to protect it against wave erosion until vegetation can be more fully established across the entire terrace. So that's another benefit that is immediately realized, is that you are reestablishing emergent marsh. And that emergent marsh, while it may not necessarily provide a lot of groceries for ducks, it does provide habitat for birds. And what specifically, so that's a bit of a description about the restoration technique itself, and it's a quite prominent component of DU's restoration efforts in coastal Louisiana. And I was down in Louisiana specifically to assist with a research project that's investigating the benefits that we're getting from this restoration technique. There's been a host of research projects conducted to look at how fish and crustaceans have responded to this technique,
Very cool.
and it's pretty well established that all of those studies have documented positive and fairly rapid benefits, to the aquatic organisms, but the information available to tell us how it's affecting submerged aquatics and water birds and waterfowl is much more sparse. And so, Ducks Unlimited and Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries partnered with Mississippi State University last year on the beginning of a research project that is a multifaceted interdisciplinary research project that's investigating all these different aspects of what we're actually getting from marsh terracing. There are numerous components to this research. One involves waterfowl surveys, which are conducted from roughly September through February. And one of the things that we have as part of this research design is one of the things that we'll get into, and we'll try not to get too technical, but we have a terraced site that we're counting birds on, and we have an unterraced site we're counting birds on. So we'll be able to make that comparison. And we have about 24 of those paired sites across the coast, all the way from Rockefeller Refuge in the west to to south of Galliano and Golden Meadow.
So that'll give you an idea if that habitat is improving so drastically that, ducks are on this side, but not on the other where there's no terraces.
That's right. And we're also measuring submerged aquatic response. We're partnering with some hydrologists at Mississippi State to measure wave attenuation and really and then the more interesting part of it, once we get that information, because we're doing this across such a large sample of terraces that differ somewhat in their design and their location and the soil characteristics, we'll be able to look across those different sites and answer the question of which ones are performing better. Here's the connection to how Ducks Unlimited does
That's as far as the shapes and the...
Shapes, location, soil characteristics. So if we can find certain locations, certain terrace styles, designs, construction, whatever the case may be, that perform better, that's the information that Ducks Unlimited and other partner agencies will use going forward to when designing and implementing new marsh terracing projects, and therefore we will be improving the effectiveness of our conservation efforts, and in the process also being more efficient with our expenditure of funds. And so I was down there helping with some collection of the submerged aquatic vegetation data, and we were using some quadcopter unmanned aerial vehicles to collect some of that data. So it was a neat opportunity for me to be out in the field, assist a few graduate students on that data collection, and get my feet back in the water and see some of the work that we're doing, and hopefully bring some science to that work as well.
Very cool. Now, just one quick question, and we're going to roll out. What are some of the different submerged aquatic vegetations that you guys were specifically looking for that would be a key target for waterfowl? I mean, you're talking like widgeon grass and just some of the various different SAVs that you guys were looking for. Yeah, so
at the most basic level, we're just wanting to measure differences in submerged aquatic. Any of those that, whether it be widgeon grass, whether it be water milfoil, you typically don't think of water milfoil as a good submerged aquatic because it's non-native, but we know from various studies in the past that waterfowl do eat it, especially gadwall.
Really?
In some areas in Louisiana, and in other places as well, you manage for water milfoil, or at least you don't manage against it, because it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's actually preferred. Hydrilla, as bad as it can be, it does provide some cover for invertebrates, and some ducks have been shown to eat it. I don't know what all they get from it. But so at the most basic level, is it producing submerged aquatic? Is it assisting in the production of submerged aquatic, creating conditions conducive to that? Compared to the unterraced site, and are we being effective with our conservation? But if we had to kind of look at the different types of submerged aquatic, and if there are some that we'd get really excited about, the rupia, the widgeon grass would certainly be at the top of that list. That's probably the top of the list. But there are a host of others.
There's probably 1,000 different variants that maybe not that many, but
there's not that many, but the milfoil, water milfoil would not necessarily be a bad thing. Coontail would not necessarily be a bad thing. Any of the other sort of floating, I don't know if they're sort of the Brassinia. It's not really submerged aquatic. It's sort of a floating aquatic. But any of those type of species of vegetation, they would be beneficial. They'd be good, because it creates. That's some of the others that I was just completely forgetting about. Some of the pond weeds. I was just totally spaced on those. I knew I was forgetting some of those. And then Najas. The genus is Najas, Najas. It's another one that's pretty beneficial, and so you can find that in some of those locations. Now, last week, just to let you know, waters were kind of high in the marsh, and we found very, very little production of submerged aquatics in either the terraced sites or the unterraced sites. And it's probably just an artifact of how high the river was and how all the rain that they've been getting in coastal Louisiana here over the summer. So
cool.
Didn't find a whole lot, but in previous years we have. And
that's part of the process.
It is. And it's not just a 1-year deal. We'll be going back. Might be going back next month, but then I'll also be going back next year to collect data for a second year.
Cool. That's awesome. And again, people out there listening to learning about these marsh terraces, Mike mentioned, you can go on Google Earth and check these out, south of Lafayette, south of Lafitte.
Not so many south of Lafayette. You kind of have to go west a little bit before you get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go to Google Earth, check them out.
That's
But appreciate it, Mike.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good being part of this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.